The Game is Rigged University, Chapter 6 Pressure Bust Pipes. After a very interesting summer, I decided I was going to return. A lot of things happened this summer that would change the future. I did visit Nikki in Chicago and met her family. She then visited me in Memphis and she met my family. We didn't say it, but our relationship had become official when we began posting each other on social media. A week before the semester began, I was informed that I had a tuition payment due before I could enroll for the semester. I knew that I would have to pay for school out of pocket, but this payment seemed very random. I had saved up some cash and I had made plans of how much further I could expand my trap once I got back. I planned to buy my first car and everything. Once I flipped the cash I saved up, I could see me and Nikki having whatever we wanted. See, I didn't trap while I was in Memphis, but I found other methods to make money. I had the most money I had ever had in my life up until that point. I was even able to lend an aunt $500 she needed, and she promised to give it back before the semester. This random tuition payment, along with how much it would cost me to return to school, had altered my vision for the future. I no longer was depending on my mother to finance me in college at all. I was only 19 years old, but I was becoming a man for real. I didn't have the luxury of coming from a wealthy family like many of my peers. I had some major responsibilities to take care of. I had to pay for my travel expenses back to campus, my new supplies for classes, and things of that nature. I also knew this semester was going to be very hectic. You see, last semester was the worst semester I've had in my entire school life academically. My track was rolling, but my grades suffered drastically. There was so much stuff happening in my life at that time that school had taken a back seat. I learned that in college, D's don't get degrees. If you have a D in a class, you might as well have an F. You would still have to retake the class if you got a D. I made a promise to myself that it was time for me to lock in. I took on more classes than usual this semester so that I could catch up on my graduation pace. Everything about this semester was different than the previous ones. I was now in a public relationship, and all of my friends were basically gone except Joe. He stayed off campus and was still in his toxic relationship, so we barely hung out. Bolton, Jorgen, and Zoe did not return. When I first got to Chicago to visit Nikki, I called Zoe to let him know I was out there. He told me he would call me back and we would meet up, but we never did, nor talked after. I arrived on campus and checked into my new dorm room. I was staying in the same dorm from last semester, even though I was an upperclassman junior. I did this because I learned the lesson of how important location is in business. Location is one of the main factors to be factual. My dorm building was really nicknamed the Trap. I wasn't ready to take the chance or had the time to build a new clientele in the apartments across campus. I then met my new roommate, Ethan. This would be the first time I had gotten a random roommate. Ethan was a short guy with big glasses and short dreadlocks. Some may consider him a dork or a nerd. The first thing I did with Ethan was break the ice. I asked him if he smokes weed and he said yes. Before I even unpacked, I sat Ethan down and I told him about me trapping. He said that this would not bother him and that he understood. He then told me a little about himself. Ethan was actually a nerdy type. He told me the thing that he loved to do most was just play video games. This didn't bother me because I didn't have to worry about certain things. It was kind of a relief that he was comfortable in who he was. So I felt he wouldn't disrupt my trap. After we finished smoking, I went to see Nikki. Nikki had told me her room number days prior. Nikki and I hadn't talked since that day because we had a slight argument. I felt the reason we didn't talk was because we wanted to build anticipation for our reunition this semester. I got to her room and she was already settled down. We then embraced each other and she wanted to come meet my new roommate. We went back to my room and she was very intrigued by my roommate. We both were laughing because he was the complete opposite of me. We wanted to see how this experiment of us being roommates would turn out. I then saw who my suite mates were. It was a guy named Josh, and he was rooming with a weirdo guy that I don't even remember his name. Josh was a small, black, scrawny kid from California. Josh was friends with a guy named Booster. I was introduced to Booster through Bolton. Booster and I had become acquainted from playing on a travel select team together. Also, Booster never said it, but I could tell he looked up to me in a fashion. I could tell this because he was one of the first people that joined the selling cigar business after I invented it. The thing was, Booster entered his college journey selling weed. He was also from Cali and he knew Bolton's plug. Booster would hang out in Josh's room often. I then noticed that Booster had Josh selling weed out of his room. This didn't bother me because I had just lived in the exact same room with someone selling and doing the same thing. So a suite was nothing. I saw no competition because I stood tall behind my product. I didn't see the trap as my end. I saw the trap as a stepping stone and me doing what I had to do to get to where I had to go. Plus, like I said before, there was enough for everyone. What I didn't know was that the competition wouldn't be the problem itself. It was that they were in that same suite in general. These guys ran their trap the complete opposite way that I did. They were sloppy. The more I observed them, the more I began to know about them. It turned out that Josh's room was the safe haven for the cosplayers. These guys were the worst of the worst. They would post on social media that they were posted on the block. By the block, they meant in front of the dorm building. Yes, a dorm building of a gated private university. They will play loud music and just stand on the stairs to mimic how gang members would stand in the hood. I actually came from the real block, so this was very disturbing to me. When I first came to college, I didn't come to be a street nigga. Life just happened, and I did what I knew to survive. These guys were trying to portray that thug image the best way they could. I kept them at a distance the last semester, but now these guys were operating out of the same suite as me. Booster turned out to be the ringleader of the group. I found out that Booster came from a great family. Booster had the entire costume to cosplay. Booster had a gold grill in his mouth. He also had tattoos and wore gold chains. His behavior was try to act as ignorant as possible. These guys weren't from the hood, so they fit into all the stereotypes. They didn't know that there are many different kinds of people in the hood, and I was a living testimony to show this. I knew I had to be cautious because these guys were too close to my trap. Even though I did my thing low key, these guys could bring a lot of negative attention with their antics. After I took care of everything financially that I needed to, I was left with a very little amount of money. I also didn't have any products to sell. It felt like I was starting from ground zero with my business again. But I knew with my grind, these times wouldn't last long. I bought a small sack from Seven and got to work. Once classes started, I knew my workload would be major this semester, but I really didn't understand what I had gotten myself into. As a college student, junior year is around the time you leave general studies and you dive deep into your major. I was taking multiple lectures and labs with no elective courses. Lab classes were once a week, but they were 3 hours in length. I was taking classes like analytical chemistry, microbiology, sociology, etc. This basically cemented me in the trap. I wouldn't have time for a job even if I tried to have one. If I did have a regular part time job, it would not cover the tuition payments. How was I going to be able to focus on these classes while trying to be a trapper? The pressure that I had on me to pay my tuition was even worse. I had thought I prepared for this pressure, but now that the time had come, it was very heavy. About 2 weeks into the semester, I developed a strategy. I began to study for the first time in my entire life. I was always naturally smart, so I didn't have to put in extra work. Since I had no friends to distract me with different things, I put all that energy into my work. I didn't have to have smoke sessions anymore. I would put on meditation music and smoke blunts as I read through my textbooks. Now that I was deep into my major, my teachers were teaching harder. They would access questions directly from the textbook, and if you didn't read, you wouldn't know the answer. Also, things were better with Nikki now. It was like when we first started hanging out without the extra characters involved. She would just be in my room chilling, doing her homework in my bed while I studied. One day, she started trying to convince me to join a fraternity. Nikki was planning to join a sorority that semester. Nikki's mother and brother both attended our same university in the past. Her brother had joined a fraternity and he was a donor to the university. Nikki then told me of her fairy tale wedding she imagined her entire life. She said that her husband and his fraternity group would be doing the stroll in a huge castle. It wasn't just to be a fraternity member, but he had to be of a certain one. I could imagine this because I could imagine being her husband. She wouldn't be my girlfriend if I thought we would end it. I wanted to someday make this dream come true for my girl. Growing up in the hood, I had always seen videos of these fraternities and sororities. They seemed like black excellence. When I was a freshman, Kelly and I had planned to join a particular fraternity when the time presented itself. This fraternity amazingly was the exact same one Nikki mentioned her husband would be a part of. The members of all the fraternities respected me as T Mac. They would watch me and scout me as a prospect to join the group. I never let them know that I noticed that they noticed me, but it was a mutual understanding. This didn't seem like a bad idea. It seemed like the perfect college love story for me. The thing that stopped me was that I had heard rumors about the things guys have to do to join these groups. I told her about this and she told me that it wouldn't be anything that bad. I told her that I would consider her suggestion and she was very excited. God works in mysterious ways. The very next day, I was alone in my room and I wanted a movie to watch in the background. There was a movie called Burning Sands, and it was made by a member of Omega Sci Fi, which is the Q Dogs. The description of the movie said it would describe the process of entering a fraternity. I started to watch the movie and I saw myself in the main character. He was a college student that had a very promising future and well liked all around campus. People began approaching him to join the fraternity, and he agreed. As the movie progressed, all the rumors that I had heard about things guys did to join were confirmed. This movie showed things that were completely inhumane and demoralizing. I thought if this was the version allowed on TV, how bad was it in real life and no cameras? The movie described the entire process. The main character knew that this was not right what they were doing behind closed doors and tried to speak to the dean about this. The dean then angrily told the young man to get out if he couldn't handle it. The dean was a member of the fraternity. This movie concluded with one of the prospects dying literally from what they were doing behind closed doors. Any thought I had of joining a fraternity was now completely gone. I had no interest whatsoever after I saw that movie. Nikki said the movie was not real, but the visuals of it left an impact so major that I wasn't going to get involved with that. It didn't take long, and my trap was rolling again with customers from the previous semester. I found out that this was the largest enrollment of freshmen in the history of the university. These freshmen started to find out who had the good weed. I was always in my room studying and trapping, so my name spread way farther than my face. The way my room was set up, you could only see me standing in the door to make the serve. My bed was behind a wall out of sight, and I had a new approach to how I did business. No one was allowed in my room. Anybody that came had to announce their name. I would crack open the door and we would do the transaction that way. Once the new customers started to roll in, I was awoken to something I had forgot about in college. I forgot one of the reasons I loved college was because of so many beautiful women at my disposal. People would add me on Snapchat and I would tell them to come get what they needed. I was posting myself less but marketing my weed every day. They knew my name, but once the women began seeing me in person during these transactions, they were not shy expressing how good they thought I looked. This wouldn't have been a problem for me, but I was now in a relationship. The relationship version of me and the single me were like night and day. That was one of the reasons I avoided committing to Nikki for so long. I knew once I entered relationships that I would not cheat. Some of the women were bolder than others during these transactions. They would say things directly to let me know that they wanted me, but Nikki would be sitting right there in my bed and would hear these things. She would respond before I could and let them know that I was off limits. She knew she had all the right to do this because I was her boyfriend officially. These moments were very difficult adjustment for me. Since I had arrived as a student, I was always a ladies' man. Now I didn't know how to respond in these situations, so sometimes I would remain completely silent. It was my mind's telling me no, but my body's telling me yes type thing. This thing started to happen very often and very fast, and I would always have to reassure Nikki after work that I was hers and only hers. I warned Nikki for so long that being in a public relationship would officially change things, and she now began to see. My birthday had arrived. My birthday fell on the weekend, so I could chill a little bit before things got too hectic in the semester. Nikki slept in my room that night and she was very excited that it was my birthday. I went to my classes for the day and it seemed to be a regular day. I didn't have anything planned. When I got out of class, I received a call from my aunt to wish me a happy birthday. She then told me she was going to send me the money she owed me. This $500 would be a relief that I needed and a boost I needed. She then mobile paid me $180. The phone conversation concluded shortly after. I knew that I was never going to get the full amount back. I was supposed to get this $500 a month ago before the semester started. If she would have sent me the money as planned before the semester, things could have been different in my life. I would have flipped that money into a lot more by my birthday. The tuition pressure on me would have been lighter. I learned a life lesson about money from the situation. No matter how sad someone's story is, don't lend them money. If you do lend it to them, you don't expect it back. You don't lend money that you will need in the future. As smoothly as you gave it to them, getting it back would not go as smoothly. Then I got a video call from Bolton. Even though Bolton transferred, he would still contact me virtually. He then showed me that he had driven from Mississippi to campus for my birthday. This made me feel loved at first, but if you haven't noticed by now, it was always something with Bolton. I told him my new room number, and he came through loud and happy. Before we could get to chilling, Nikki texted and said, "Could I stay out of my room for a few minutes?" This request seemed strange, but I knew she wanted to surprise me with something. I then grabbed a blunt to roll to pass time. Bolton and I then went to the yard to pass time. While on the yard, Bolton was like a dog when its owner came home. He was in everyone's face that he knew from last semester. He then seized two guys we had known since freshman. Their names were Jamie and Todd. Jamie and Todd were close and always hung together since freshman year. They were cool associates, but I wouldn't consider them my friends. Bolton then tells them to smoke some. He wanted to start a smoke session. These two guys were like, "Bet." Bolton then says we should go smoke in his new car. I agreed because there was really no reason not to. By the time we got to the car, I was done rolling the blunt I had. I sat in the passenger seat while the two guys sat in the back seat. I fired up the blunt and everything was smooth. Bolton was talking to the two guys about his new school, but I did not say much of anything. I had gotten lost in thought looking out the window. Once my blunt was smoked by us, Todd said something that made me regain focus. He told us that he and Jamie would get up with us, meaning they were leaving. Bolton and I looked directly at each other. I was so pissed when I realized I was the only person who had weed in this session. Bolton didn't even have any weed, but it was his idea for a session. I honestly wasn't upset with Todd and Jamie because Bolton said smoke some, not match it. Dude really offered up my weed
like it was his. Before I could express my anger, Nikki told me to come to my room now. I got out of the car and didn't say anything to Bolton, but he followed me to my room. When I walked in my room, Nikki had bought me giant balloons that read 20 for my age, a pair of shoes, and she had written me 20 note cards on the reason she loved me. She was standing with Liz and Joe. Apparently, Joe was in on this and he gave her the ride to get this stuff. I was just very upset before I walked in, but I started reading the note cards and my smile in my heart was starting to spread to my face. The thoughtfulness and the reasons did this to me. She had major reasons and little things that I did. As I read the note cards in one hand, I grabbed her and hugged her with my other. We smiled together as I read, while Liz and Joe joked at how cute this was. This heartfelt moment was interrupted when Bolton let out a gasp of excitement. This was a record scratch while the beautiful music was playing. Everyone then looked at him. The gas was not due to the moment, but he started to show an email on his phone. He then started talking loudly, saying, "Look how much money I'm getting on my refund check this semester." Really, nigga? When no one responded to this randomness, he started putting the phone closer to our faces to get some type of reinforcement. I was pissed again. When I noticed the date on the email, it said the email was received on the 16th. It was the 28th. My head then began putting pieces together to the puzzle again. Bolton was attention seeking. The grand gesture Nicky had shown me caused him to act out. He was trying to steal my moment. Why would you drive 3 hours here to act like this? When this puzzle picture was clear, I was more upset than when we walked in. Nikki sensed my shift in energy happening and tried her best to stop it by ignoring him and smiling in my eyes. The damage was done. She didn't know about what happened a few minutes before. My entire energy had dropped. My arm slowly fell from hugging Nikki and I just sat on my bed. I was so thrown off that I didn't realize I had not read all the cards. Everyone in the room saw that something was very wrong with me. I was ready for Bolton to go. Liz and Joe were looking awkwardly now because they just went from teasing me and Nikki about love to seeing this displeasure on my face. Liz and Joe said they were about to leave. Bolton then says, "Yeah, I'm about to hit the road," and leaves behind them. I didn't acknowledge any of them leaving and kept my head down. When I looked up, Nikki was looking at me upset. She was about to walk out the door, but I grabbed her and stopped her. She then began telling me how much effort she put in behind the scenes for this moment. She was going on and on about it until I stopped her to explain my mood. She did not know that this was because of Bolton. She was just upset that I was upset. In a moment she worked so hard to make special for me, I began to feel her in on everything I had peeped. We had a serious talk about not letting things make me angry. My temper had to be worked on.
I began to calm down and we decided to watch a movie. During this movie time, my birthday had only a few hours remaining and the best was saved for last. The best part of my birthday ended up being a video call back home smoking a blunt. Birthdays at the time were very special to me and my best friend Mark. We always celebrated our birthdays to remind us of our friends that died. It was a reminder life is short, and it was a blessing to see another year. Mark was my best friend, but we called each other brothers. Mark then tells me he's coming to visit me tomorrow along with another buddy named Tutu. This was a visit from friends I was looking forward to. My homies arrived the next day and it had a great vibe instantly. They told me they were in the parking lot, so I went to get them. We entered my dorm building when Mark's gun dropped out of his pants in the lobby. Luckily, no one was there to witness this accident, but it was funny to us. Once we entered my room, we began joking and smoking. This was a time that I needed. It felt like we were bad little kids again. We decided to go to the mall and we would go to dinner that night.
Nikki and I agreed the night before that I would be spending that time with them while they were out there. When we decided we were having dinner that night, I told Nikki I wanted her to come. She responded, okay. While I was at the mall, she texted me and said that she wanted a snack she was craving. She asked if I could bring it to her. I told her I was off campus because the mall was 30 minutes away. I was not prepared for her text back. She went off about how she did all those things for my birthday and I couldn't even bring her the candy she wanted. I looked at my phone confused, but then I figured she was joking in the text. When we got back to campus about an hour later, I texted her and told her that we were headed to her room to get her. I got to her room and knocked on the door, but I got no answer. This was odd because I could hear the TV playing. I then began to call her phone. I heard it ring once through the door before she cut the ringer off. What the fuck? What was her problem? The more seconds I stood looking like a sad puppy at her door, the more awkward my friends started to look at me. I then began to walk away from the door. I was embarrassed. Mark then began to question me what was wrong. They met Nikki when she visited me in Memphis, and Mark had spoken to her virtually a few times. Mark thought our relationship was goals. I then told him why she was upset, and he was just as confused as me. He then reminded me that it was my birthday. How could she get mad at her request not being fulfilled? It wasn't like it was an emergency. We got to the dinner and my vibe was completely ruined. We ate fast and left the restaurant. The next morning was Sunday, and they were headed back to Memphis. We got one last smoke session in before they left. When they left, I texted Nikki she was in her room. She was now responded again. She said yes, so I went to see what was going on. She told me that she felt unappreciated by me because I couldn't take time to bring her item. I explained to her why I couldn't and that she took it too far by ignoring me at her door and not coming to my dinner. This talk started to piss me off and I didn't want to explode. I began heading for the door before she stopped me and began hugging me. What the fuck? She then says I was right and she was sorry. Just like that, the slate was clean. Around 2 days after my birthday, I went to class as usual. As I approached the entrance to my dorm building, I saw Booster and my suite mate standing amongst a sea of cosplayers. All the pretenders seemed to hang out together on the block, as they called it. I was walking from a distance, but I saw all of them go and enter the building. Some of the cosplayers didn't stay on campus. They came from wealthy families, so they literally had the option to get an apartment outside of campus, and some of them did this. Their antics of pretending to be hood were so blatant that administrators in the university took notice. They took notice because the campus was a great college environment, and these guys were trying to act as if it was something else. They were ruining the image of the university. As I watched them enter the building, I noticed that Miss Lewis and the guy who wrote the bogus judicial report on me, Mr. Robinson, were watching them as well. I thought nothing of this at first, so I continued to head to my room. I had a test coming up for my next class, so I thought I should get a study session in. When I entered my room, I heard a lot of noise coming from my suite mate's room. All the cosplayers had gathered and were now trying to have a mini party in the room. I didn't have time to focus on this. I only had an hour to study. I quickly rolled up a blunt and put on my meditation music. The suite door then opened and there was a knock at both doors. Before I could ask who it was, the knockers announced themselves. It was Miss Lewis and Mr. Robinson. Holy shit. I had just sparked the blunt and I was still on probation. I knew I couldn't panic and I had to think on my feet. I put the blunt out and I slightly sprayed an air freshener so you couldn't hear the squeeze of the bottle. As I was doing this, I heard them enter my suite mate's room. They kicked all of the visitors out of the room and were focused on them. I then opened my door slowly, wiping my eyes as if I were napping. Miss Lewis then entered the room and apologized for disturbing my sleep. She then began to wish me a happy belated birthday because I still had the big balloons Nikki had bought me. I told her that I actually thanked them for knocking because I had to get up and study. She then told me that she was proud of me and her focus went back to my suitemates. I locked my door knowing I had just dodged a bullet. Even though my room may have smelled like smoke, my suitemates were already smoking in their room. My mind put together why they came in the first place. Robinson and Lewis didn't come to bother me. They had seen what I saw when I approached my dorm. They saw all those guys enter the building and they knew where they were headed. They just didn't know which room was theirs in the suite. This put me on point, and I realized that other people can bring you down. This was confirmation to me that I had to be extra cautious now. I used to only have to deal with Bolton's antics. Now it was like 10 of these guys.
A few days later, our university was partnering with other universities in the city of New Orleans to have a marathon walk in City Park. Students were told that community service hours would be given to those who helped. We needed community service hours to graduate, so this was a perfect opportunity. Nikki and I signed up for the walk together. That Saturday morning, a charter bus drove students to City Park. It was very early, around 8 in the morning, when we arrived at the walk. It hadn't begun yet. I then realized I was completely not dressed for the situation. I thought that they wanted students to help do things like pass out water along the way and stuff of that nature. It turned out that they wanted students to participate in the marathon as well. I had on a hoodie, sweatpants, and slides. It did not look like I was about to do a marathon walk. Before the walk began, everyone met in a common area. I was sitting down next to Nikki in a row of chairs. That is when I noticed out of the corner of my eye a group of young ladies. The group of young ladies seemed to be looking in my direction, and I could tell from their body language they were discussing me. I had seen one of the girls in particular that added me on Snapchat. I remembered her even though she had never bought something from me because she posted Big Head one day, showing off a nice amount of weed to these new freshman girls. I remembered this because he was trying to stunt as usual, and I thought it was silly back then, but it was really lame to me at this point with my new maturity. This young lady name was Maya. Maya was ironically also from Chicago, just like Nikki. I was looking straight ahead, trying to ignore what was coming my way. Maya was very bold and saw me sitting next to Nikki. She then walked directly up to me and tapped me on my shoulder. I looked very confused because we had never had a conversation. She then says, "Hey T Mac." This had me in a very uncomfortable situation. I then awkwardly kept looking ahead of me, not looking at Maya. She then continued and she asked, why was I acting like that? Her word choices made it seem like as if we really knew each other. But this was our first conversation physically or virtually. Maya was trying to flirt with me. I continued to look straight ahead and Maya walked off. Maya either didn't know that I had a girlfriend or she really just didn't care at all. When I looked to see Maya walking off, I turned to Nikki and she had already walked off as well. I then began to look for Nikki, but it was like she disappeared. I knew what just happened upset her and I tried to find her to explain it was not what it looked like. While I was looking for Nikki for several minutes, the marathon began. I then noticed that I wasn't going to find her, so I just started to walk. A lot of the marathoners were running full sprints, but I was one of the ones walking at my own pace. During this walk, I was just reflecting on strange situation that happened. When we got back to the charter buses, there was Nikki in the seats that we had sat in. The bus was very crowded, so the conversation had to wait till we got back to my room. When we got to my room, Nikki was still upset. I had told her that I had no idea why Maya did that, and I was being honest. Since I knew for a fact that I had done nothing wrong, I began to act accordingly. I was making jokes, asking Nikki, like, what does she want to eat now? Anything I did, though, Nikki gave me a very cold shoulder. This caused me to get very frustrated every time.
Before I knew it, I began yelling very aggressively at Nikki, trying to get it through her head that the situation was nothing. When I lost my temper, Nikki just looked at me, grabbed her purse, and walked out. Damn it. I was trying not to get upset, but I couldn't control my temper. I felt bad immediately, so I followed Nikki to her room. I was trying to talk to her the entire walk, but she kept walking ahead of me and wouldn't even turn around to acknowledge my presence. When she got to her room, I tried to enter, but she slammed the door in my face without saying a word. This was one of those rare situations where I had no idea what to do. Eventually, hours later, Nikki calmed down and she returned to my room. I hugged her with great relief and then once again reassured her she was the only girl I was dealing with. As the semester went along with time, so did the pressure of my tuition balance. I hated being out of my room unnecessarily. I didn't want to miss any sales. It was like seeing a unicorn if you saw me outside of my room. There was no more chilling on the yard scouting new girls to talk to because I was faithful. I was already introverted, and this new isolation with no friends advanced this introversion. Plus, I had all those extra courses to catch up with. I needed to focus on my grades for real this semester. Nikki had applied to join a sorority. She then got a letter of rejection. I told her that it was okay. If they didn't want her, why would she want to be one of them? She, on the other hand, took this very seriously. She was determined to be one of them, so she called her big brother. He then made some phone calls and used his donor power to make them accept her in the process. Nikki had become obsessive about joining this group, and even though I had expressed to her I wanted nothing to do with Greek life, she still would throw hints to convince me to give it a shot. Once the time had passed where they were accepting new members for the semester, Nikki's attitude seemed to shift negatively toward me. She saw that I really wasn't going to do it. The shift wasn't swift, it was slow and progressive. One day I realized how long it had been since I had fresh air. I told myself I should go stand outside for a few minutes. If anybody hit me up about getting weed, I would just rush back to my room. I went to stand on the cafeteria terrace. I began talking to two guys who I had played basketball with. Through a window, I could see the bottom of the cafeteria, and I saw Nikki and Liz. Suddenly, a guy walks up to them and begins talking to them. I'm watching this situation closely, but the two guys I was talking to didn't notice I wasn't really listening to them anymore. Nikki had her natural hair out and she had on a nice dress that day. This guy seemed more interested in talking to Nikki than Liz. I'm observing the body language, and this was not the first time they had met. The guy then touched Nikki's hair very briefly. It seemed as if he had made a joke to her, but it wasn't shit funny to me. This physical touch sent me into a rage on the inside, but I remained calm because I didn't want the two guys I was talking to know what I was looking at. The conversation between Nikki, Liz, and the guy ended. They went separate ways, but the way Nikki went led her straight to me. I was about 10 feet away from the doorway that she had to exit out of. She walked out the doorway and didn't notice me at first. But when she did, it was like she saw a ghost. She had already walked a distance before she noticed me, and I didn't want to make a public scene. I then texted her phone while she was still walking to gauge her reactions. I texted her, "What the fuck was that?" She responded confused, asking, "What was I talking about?" I said I saw her talking to that guy and I didn't like what I saw. She then had told me that the guy was a new freshman and he would take her and Liz to get groceries. She then told me that this was nothing. I was overreacting. I thought about the situation with Maya and how upset Nikki was at me, even though it really was nothing. I could really put myself in her shoes at that moment, and I saw exactly what she felt when it happened to her. Therefore, I gave her the benefit of the doubt just as she had given me. I was sitting in class one day, and then my phone began to receive a lot of messages at once. I just thought this was the trap as usual. I opened one of the messages and they were about the trap, but it was not about a sale. I was informed that the university was bringing police dogs to sniff out drugs and do a shakedown on the dorms. This caused my heart to race and I lost complete focus on what my teacher was teaching. There was only 5 minutes left in class, but I left early anyway. By the time I made it to my room, my brain had put together a master plan. I know how strong a K9's nose is because that's what I even came to school for. I came to get a degree that would help me with a zoology career. I knew so much about animals that it was time to put this use to my advantage in the trap. I then took cups of bleach and placed them all over my room. I took the weed that I had and I stashed it in the ceiling. The tiles on the ceiling were able to move, so this was an easy process. I knew that the smell of bleach would cause the dogs to whimper. They wouldn't even want to come in my room because the smell was already strong to humans, and dog noses are way more sensitive than ours. I was right. I heard that the dogs did come through the dorms, but they did not enter my room at all. After about 3 hours, it was safe for me to resume trapping. I started to smoke a blunt and reflect on how I just came up with this strategy. I now have added a weapon to my repertoire. They had never had dogs searched before, but as I said, this semester will be very different. Even though I had several different difficult courses, I only had a handful of teachers. These teachers taught multiple classes that all correlated. My microbiology teacher was Dr. Truffles. Dr. Truffles was a very educated man, but he was a sarcastic asshole sometimes. With my new mindset, I sat in the front row in almost all my classes now. When I first started college, being the only guy in the class seemed like a great thing. Now being the only guy made me stand out even more. A lot of times, Dr. Truffles would ask the class a question, and he didn't want anyone to raise their hands. He would directly call on me for the answer. He did this so often that it made other students start to notice. These classes made me realize how hard they were after we got our results for the first test. No one in the class got above a 50%. My grade was 26%. This was mentally devastating to me. I had studied and been focusing hard, yet I got a 26% out of 100. This made me question my intellectual ability. I had been the top of my class my entire life. I was labeled a kid genius, but now I felt like a true dumbass. Dr. Truffles then tells us he would start hosting study group sessions outside of the class. I knew I would have to attend every one of these to even remotely try to pass this class. I knew if I got any bad grades this semester, I would likely drop out of school. Once Nikki was about to begin her process to join a sorority, she told me that she would be very busy. I understood this and accepted this because she was my girl and I supported her 100%. Once she started the process, our relationship took another turn. She came to my room and told me that her and Trish would be joining the same time. This would make them line sisters. I sat there frozen at this news because Nikki hated Trish. She then began to say how they had been talking and becoming cool. She said she liked her. This had me mind blown. I could never imagine this. Nikki always competed with Trish for me and was very vocal about her dislike of her. The more she talked, the more worse it got for our relationship. This time, she would be in my room. Now she didn't want to be my trap queen anymore. She said she couldn't have that in her image now. This caused an argument because she never had a problem before, and she never had a problem when the trap was buying us food, gifts, and making sure we were straight. Also, our sex life took a very downward spiral. We went from fucking like rabbits to sex being almost non existent. There would be times where I would try to initiate the sex, and I would be turned down harshly. Nikki then began saying that is all that I wanted from her. This would cause another giant argument because after everything we had been through, how the fuck could she say that? I literally waited for months to have full sex with her. The times we did, it didn't feel the same. I did not enjoy it anymore. I remember while doing it with her thinking in my head, I'm only 19 years old. How could I be with her for a lifetime if the sex life is downhill at age 19? I had thoughts of temptation that there were so many girls I could fuck, but this is what I'm dealing with. Every time these thoughts would be erased by my morals, I vowed my loyalty to her. I had made her my girlfriend, so whatever it was, we could work through it together. We would have full arguments and many breakups. Things were different than they were last semester. She wasn't the one breaking us back together. I was putting in the extra effort now. The breakups will only last no more than 2 days. The reason they even lasted that long was because I would be so busy that I had no time to try and woo her. After one breakup, she then informed me that she had begun talking to her guy best friend again. She told me that she had reached out to him to get a guy's perspective on things, including our lack of sex life. We had so many arguments to start the semester. I accepted this because maybe it could be a sign of growth. I thought we didn't want each other to have friends of the opposite gender because we couldn't trust each other. I looked at this as a way to show her I trusted her. She smiled when I told her, okay, that was fine with me. Then we had sex finally. The sex was better this time. The next day, God then decided he wanted to play a joke. I got a random social media message from my old girl best friend. Her name was Jenny. This was my best friend during my time in middle school and throughout high school. We lost contact during my freshman year because of an awkward situation. We exchanged numbers and started a video call. The mood was wonderful. We had so much stuff to catch up on. The biggest surprise to her was that I told her I had a girlfriend now. My best friend knew how much of a player I was, almost more than anyone. So this was breaking news to her. She knew I only had one serious girlfriend my entire life, and she used to beef with my ex a lot about me. While she was still showing her facial expressions of shock, there was a knock at my door. It was Nikki. Nikki entered and saw my best friend on the call. As I walked to sit back in the chair, I could see Nikki's smile turning into a frown. I then brought Nikki closer to the phone and introduced them. Nikki then sat in my lap and began rubbing my face to show her possession of me. She was marking her territory. I could sense she felt the need to show my best friend that I was her boyfriend. Jenny had no response to this. She just smiled and acted natural. Jenny and I had never done anything physically. When we were in 8th grade, we tried to be boyfriend and girlfriend, but it lasted 3 days before we said we'd rather be best friends. I then told Jenny that I had to get back to studying, but we made a promise to stay in touch this time. I studied for a few hours, but I had a 5 o'clock lab class. Yes, I had a 3 hour lab class at 5 in the evening. The only bad thing about these labs was how long they were. I really enjoyed these classes because I was able to do things I would have never been able to do in the hood. I was playing with highly exclusive chemicals and equipment. I would wear goggles and a lab coat, and it made me feel like I was a real mad scientist. Also, these classes didn't have many students in each of them. The teacher rarely would give us undivided attention. This was an upperclassman and upper level lab. We mostly just got instructions and had to do the lab on our own and repeat our results. This would have been smooth, but it may take you 15 minutes to get the equipment set up and complete the lab. The results, however, would take time and high tech machines to cook up. It was not wise to leave these highly dangerous and explosive chemicals unattended. I would go live on my social media with a lot of my friends and family back home. I only use these social media for these kind of reasons. I would get all different types of comments. Some of my friends, like Mark, saying I was cooking up crack. And a few comments later, you would see my mother telling me how proud of me she was. This made me feel good to be able to show people from my hood that it was more to life than us pulling triggers and selling dope. I wanted to show them how cool some of the science experiments were firsthand. It made it even better being somebody who not only looked like them, but they knew I came from a place like they did. Before I left, Nikki was in my bed doing some homework. She had already taken a shower and it seemed like she was in for the rest of the night. I had left to go to class. In college, if your teacher doesn't show up in the first 15 minutes, you are free to go. To my surprise, Dr. Truffles didn't show, and he sent us an email saying he had an emergency, he couldn't make it. I wished the best for him, but I was so excited I didn't have to stay in lab that night. When I got back to my room, Nikki was nowhere to be found. This was odd to me, so I video called her. When she answered, I noticed she was in a car. What caught my attention even more was her facial expression. Her background was dead silent. I sensed the guilt. I asked her where she was. She responded telling me that she had to go and get some items from the beauty supply store. The beauty supply store was less than a mile walk from campus. I asked how she got to the store, and she then told me it was the guy who I saw touch her hair. I hung up the phone on her with my face filled with anger. I began smoking a blunt and reflecting. Why did Nikki not mention she had to go to the store? Better yet, why did she abruptly leave when she knew I had a 3 hour lab? Why didn't she just walk to the store? My brain started to come closer and closer that Nikki was cheating on me, but it was not conclusive. After about 30 minutes, Nikki asked me to come to her room. I had no problem with this. I didn't even finish my blunt because I wanted answers ASAP. I entered her room to see Liz and her unpacking groceries. I noticed she had bought my favorites for me as usual, and this threw my turmoil energy into a weird spot. Liz sensed the vibe and gave us some privacy. Nikki began speaking before I could ask any questions. She told me that her sorority probate was in 3 days and that this was the only time she would have to get the stuff. She said she needed a ride from him because the store was going to close if she walked. She told me that the guy did not have a chance with her. She went on to give a few reasons why, and she slipped up and said, with a disgusted face, he talked about sex too much. I cut her off and asked her, why are y'all talking about sex anyway? She then told me to fact check with Liz that they would just be in the car and the guy would have a random outburst about sex. She said that the guy was giving her free rides to get groceries and stuff, so she tolerated it. She said Liz was always with them. They had never been alone together. I stared at her emotionless for a few seconds. I was mad and glad at what she had just told me. I was mad because the story sounded too good to be true, but I was glad that she had a logical answer. Even if she did do something, I had no concrete evidence, only speculation. I noticed how timid she was, waiting for my reaction. I simply responded, Alright. I believed her, but my guard was now back rising. I then grabbed the item she bought me and I returned to my dorm. One particular day, I was cooling in my room studying. The mood was very chill and peaceful. There was a random knock at the door, but this was normal with my clientele. Some people never managed to get my contact information or social media, but they knew I would be posted in the trap. I always made people announce who they were before I opened the door. This time, it was Big Head. This confused me for a moment because we no longer did business together. So what could he possibly want? I let Big Head into the room and I paused my study music. I can see and sense the look on his face that something was off with him. I asked him what was up, and he told me the shocking news that he was robbed. My eyes bucked because this was a reminder that even though I was a college student, I was still playing with fire. He saw the look of concern on my face and asked if I could take a ride with him to discuss what happened. I closed my textbook and grabbed a blunt to smoke. I was eager to hear this story. I was eager to hear the story because I always learn from others' mistakes. There was a reason why I moved like I did. When it came to my trap, I grew up in and around traps all my life. I watched what would work and I watched what didn't work. Big Head then tells me that he was set up by his two minions. This was shocking to me because these two were cosplaying the drug dealer hood lifestyle. Their cosplay was so obvious that it was embarrassing to witness. He told me that one of his minions had gotten in contact with people who didn't attend the university. This was a common thing in college that I had learned. Those parties and rides room freshman year with random street guys had already had me on point. There are guys that hang on campuses that aren't enrolled there. They just hang around and try to enjoy the lifestyle without doing the actual schoolwork. He told me that one of the minions knew this, but he wasn't there when it happened. He told me he asked the minion about it and he immediately started crying because he knew but didn't say anything. Apparently, the off campus guys had their eyes on Big Head. They told his minion that if he set up Big Head, they would share what they got from him with him. He took them up on his offer, and this is how it happened. Big Head then tells me that his minion said the guys wanted to buy a pound of weed. They met in a car parking lot next to the dorms. Big Head never got out of the car and tried to let his minion handle the transaction by getting in the car with the other guys. As Big Head told me this story, I was gathering information and things that I could learn from, but I just acted as if I was listening. See, Big Head let his minion handle the big transaction at the time because he felt like a boss sitting back in the car. So he trusted 448 grams to be dealt by someone else other than him. His minion told him that he would take the pound of weed and he would count the money before he got out of the car with him. Big Head says suddenly his minion is pushed out of the car and the guys sped off. He says that he tried to pursue them, but it was no use. The element of the surprise was on their side. He then tells me that one of the guys that robbed him actually reached out through social media. This was odd to me because why would they do that? I then learned just how stupid some criminals are. They did this to taunt him instead of keeping their identity concealed. They confirmed that Big Head was set up by his minion. Even though his minion was cosplaying, he still taught me a lesson that related to the streets. Big Head was greedy, and I knew this for myself, so his minion must have felt unappreciated. If you don't feed your wolves, you will be put on the menu. I never said a word as Big Head told this story, but my facial expression spoke volumes. I was soaking in this information when Big Head did something very unexpected. He told me the story in a very calm manner, then he randomly shifted into a very serious mood and tone. He asked me if I had any involvement in it. I honestly damn near was offended. I snapped back from my thoughts and looked at him in his eyes, but I understood in a way. I didn't have to say any words before Big Head said he knew I didn't have anything to do with it based on my natural reaction. I then put the puzzle pieces together. That's why he came to see me to see what I knew, but I had no idea this event even happened. Big Head then proceeded to pull up to a famous local restaurant. He offered to buy my food to make it seem like a sign of gratitude that I wasn't involved. He didn't know I had already completed the puzzle of his character. Him buying me some food made him feel like he was feeding me in a sense, and this gave him a rush of power. It also meant he wanted something from me. He began to tell me that he missed doing business with me. He felt this way toward me, but I didn't feel the same way toward him. He told me when he bounced back from this situation to contact him so we can start up again. I told him that I would think over this offer and get back to him on it. We then got our food and headed back to campus. As we drove back to campus, I had to come to a realization that I can make some quick flips to get ahead. I wouldn't have to pay Big Head back until later, and I could flip the profit I made. I would be able to buy more from Seven. I came to this realization because the thoughts of missing my tuition payment were constant. I always had thoughts of what if an unexpected expense occurred and ruined everything, and I would be kicked out for not paying my tuition. I couldn't let this happen, so I knew I had to put my pride to the side. I told Big Head once we parked that I would accept his offer. He then gave me a few ounces at a way cheaper price than we had dealt with before. This was even better because my trap was bigger than it had been before. I was able to flip those few ounces in a matter of hours. The next day, I saw Big Head in the cafeteria at the table full of people. I made eye contact with him from a distance and gave him a head nod to meet me in the bathroom. He got up very fast and it startled the people at his table. When he entered the bathroom, his face was concerned that there was something wrong. When I pulled out the cash, his jaw dropped. He had forgotten I was a true trapper. He realized how much I had grown, even though I was doing my thing back then. He told me he was low on product and he would get to me more as soon as possible. I told him that was smooth, but little did he know I had done what I needed to do with that one flip. We exited the bathroom at different times to keep the meeting discreet that we just had. I met up with Seven later that day. When I met up with Seven, he had a very expressive smile on his face. We met in his car behind the dorm as usual. He then tells me that he didn't know I was a trapper. I looked at him and he continued to say the way he found out was because typing his information into someone's mobile payment, he saw my name. He was more in shock than anything. He had just thought I was a guy who smoked insane amounts of weed, but I bought it in bulks. He realized two things can't be true. He was rather impressed at how discreet I was, even though a lot of people bought from me. He then says that our relationship shouldn't just be business. Seven has seen me on social media and around campus many times. He would give compliments about how funny I was, but we never hung out still. He then told me that would change in the future. He respected my hustle, and I respected him. It was a normal night in the dorms. I went to the vending machine in the lobby area to grab some snacks before I studied. As I was walking, a guy named Tay told me to match. This was very random. Tay was a short guy with a lot of tattoos and dreadlocks. He was also a native to the city. The thing with Tay was we both came in as freshmen together, but we had never kicked it or even talked. We had played flag football together before, but the way he acted made me think we would never have any interactions. Tay also sold weed. Tay would send his girl to buy cigars from me because he stayed right down the hall. I said yes to this because I saw a business opportunity. I had never spoken to him directly, so I wanted to see where his head was at. I told him let's do it, and he invited me to his room. I went to his room and we began smoking. He was telling me about his business and the drug game. I was very quiet and gave short answers because I didn't trust him. He then caught me completely off guard when he told me he had been robbing all the drug dealers on campus. I remember being frozen with a lot of thoughts racing in a short time span. Why was he telling me this? And he knows that I was a drug dealer? Why was he even comfortable telling me this our first time kicking it? He told me that he felt the same way I did about the guys cosplaying and that he was from the same type of environment I was. He told me that he had even robbed his suite mate who sold weed. He told me that this was fairly easy because he just waited for them to leave, but they left their door unlocked. He said he just walked in and grabbed the product and walked out. He then began to share with me his more aggressive times robbing people. He told me that he was basically extorting some of the dealers instead of just robbing them one time. He told me he did a guy that I knew very badly. He said that the guy was bragging that he had just got a new re-up. The re-up was only about an ounce, but Tay said he grabbed it out of his hands immediately. He told the guy that he didn't have to pay his plug back, he had to pay Tay now. Even though Tay was keeping the weed, the guy still had to come up with the money to pay him for the weed. His girl then walked in the door, so we shifted the conversation to some small talk. We began to compliment each other on how good our products were because we both had quality. I wrapped up the smoke session because I had to go back to my room and make some plays. He then told me that we should start doing this more often. I just said, okay. After everything we had talked about, my mind was still stuck on him saying he was robbing everybody and had robbed almost everybody. You know what they say, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. A few days later, the exact same thing happened. He saw me in the hall and asked me to match. My trap was going crazy at this time, so I allowed him into my room. I sat at my desk that was across the way, and he sat in a chair that was near my bed. Nikki was in my bed at the time doing her homework. Nikki had told me a story from last semester about Tay. She then told me that he had come to buy weed while I was gone one time, but his Momo payment didn't work. She says that he was persistent in telling her that he would pay me. She said that she thought the guy was scared of me or something. I told her at that time it was a thing called respect. And after what happened with the last guy that did some bogus things in my trap, my reputation was solid. I wasn't to be fucked with. My desk and his chair was separated by like 5 feet. I was also very crafty in my trap. Even though my roommate Ethan was a cool personality, I trusted no one around my product. I would always switch up the spots that I had stashed in my room. On this particular occasion, I had the weed stored in the microwave in a big to go box. If my room was to be searched, that would be one of the last places anyone would suspect. I learned the lesson of if you want to hide something from someone, you put it directly in their face. Someone wanted to buy some weed while we were smoking. Therefore, I had to reveal my microwave's hidden spot, but it didn't matter. I had many crafty tricks and places to stash my stash. When I opened the box, I had around 4 different strands of weed. I found that I could separate myself even more from trappers by giving people multiple strands in one bag. Different strands of weed have different effects. I was giving people a hybrid experience that was different from any dealer on campus. It didn't matter if the person wanted 1 gram, it would contain multiple strands. As I was preparing the order for the customer, Tay got up to pass me the blunt. He then saw the bags of weed all had different colors. He grabbed one of the bags very fast and said, "You got different strands, dog?" When he grabbed the bag, my instincts kicked in and I got very serious. I calmed down because he immediately put it down, and I thought to myself, he was genuinely in shock and may have been admiring my hustle. While I was making the play, Nikki and I were having a conversation about something meaningless. I then thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I started to do the business with the customer, so I was trying to multitask. But it sounded like Tay said in a low tone that Nikki was messing with little boys and needed to fix that. He wasn't meaning little boys by age, he was meaning little boys as inferior to him. When this processed in my head, I looked at both of them, but he had his head down with his dreads hanging over his face. He was in the same position he was when I went to open the door for the play. Nikki, however, was looking at him and questioning what because she didn't hear what he really said. He then said something about her homework because they were both psychology majors and had classes together. Nikki didn't have a reaction that would make me confirm what I thought I had heard. I then thought maybe I was tripping and insecure. My mind wouldn't register that a guy would try to get at my girl in my room in my face. My ego wouldn't accept it, and the fact that they started talking about homework, I wrote it off as an intrusive thought and the devil on my shoulder type situation. We continued our smoke session until the blunts went out. Then he left. Throughout the semester, Tay and I began to have very random smoke sessions. Although we never did business together, we would celebrate and talk about how well we both were doing with it. The conversations we had started to get deeper, and I began to share more with him. We started to build a friendship, but it was still kept at a distance. One day I was chilling at my desk, and Ethan was at his desk. We both were studying for our classes. We heard our suite door open, but our suite was very busy considering the fact both rooms in it were selling weed. Sometimes the suite door would open and there would be a knock on my door. Sometimes the suite door would open and there would be a knock on my suite mate's door. My trap was doing so well that I told Ethan he didn't have to answer the door if he didn't want to. Ethan had a couple of friends, including the weirdo guy, suite mate, but 99% of the knocks at the door were my customers. On this day, though, there was no knock at either door. Our room door was locked, but the door handle jiggled gently for 3 seconds, and then we heard the suite door open again. It was very fast. When Ethan and I heard this, we both looked at each other confused. We didn't say any words, but I think we both communicated effectively. I understood that his friends would always knock, and he understood that my clientele knew to knock. Also, Nikki would have not left the suite if it was her, and she would have just banged on the door if it wasn't unlocked. I prepared myself to protect my trap if this was a setup. I then went to the door and looked out into the suite. Then I looked in the hall and down the hall, and there was not a soul to be found. I did this almost immediately after the suite door opened the second time. So whoever jangled the door had to run away. This put me on alert even more with my trapping. It also put another devastating thought in my head. If I wasn't in the room and it was just Ethan, my product stood no chance. Ethan will be easy prey. I then sat down because my anxiety was now through the roof. My thoughts began to race. Whoever it was, I figured they didn't want to try to take it from me. They knew they had to steal it. This suspect wanted no confrontation with me physically. These thoughts caused my anxiety to begin to come to the surface more. Now, every time that I was out of my room, even for class, I had to worry in the back of my head that I couldn't protect my product while I was gone. My plate of life was already full, and my stomach was bloated, but this was like adding dessert. The next morning, I woke up for class. I had to take a piss. I was disturbed severely when I entered the bathroom with the toilet. There was bloody tissue on the toilet, and I realized that the bathroom was very dirty as well. This was not only disgusting, this was a health hazard. Who would leave bloody fucking tissue on the toilet? I didn't have guests to use the bathroom, so I knew it was my suite mates or their friends. I then opened the shower door across the suite. There were large clumps of hair all over the shower, and when I say clumps, I mean clumps of hair. I couldn't believe what I saw. You could have made a wig out of how much hair was in the shower. Before you knew it, I snapped. The way I saw it, we were all grown men. This was unacceptable, and I was not about to clean up after these grown ass dudes. I had done this once last semester with Nikki, but that shit was dead now. I began to knock on my suite mate's door. Even though there was no TV or sound in the room, I could hear someone moving around in their bed. After a few seconds of knocking loudly, I yelled out, "Open the door!" My tone of voice was very menacing. When I realized that the person was ignoring the door, I began to stop it. I then began to express my displeasure with what was going on in the suite. I realized that my suite mates were terrified of my anger. Everybody plays gangster until the real deal comes around. Instead of opening the door like men, they cowered in their room. They should have just opened the door because I had to find a solution at that moment. I was upset, so I headed to Miss Lewis's office. When I walked into her office, she began smiling and said, "What is it now?" She saw the displeasure of my angry body language. I told her that I needed a new room now. She was confused because I seemed fine when she saw me in the room the other day. I then told her about what I had discovered when I woke up. Her face was disturbed from hearing the words, but she literally got up from her desk and said she had to see this for herself. She stopped by Mr. Robinson's office and grabbed him as well. When they entered the suite, they were appalled and immediately knocked on the door for my suite mates. When they announced who they were, my suite mates opened the door, and this infuriated me because they were true bitches. They opened the door for them, but they were scared to open it for me because they thought I was going to beat them up. I may have, though. But at this point, the situation was out of my hands. Miss Lewis told me to go in my room and calm down. Ethan was chilling in the room as this was happening. He had heard me yelling before I went to go visit Miss Lewis, and by the time I was back, he had seen it for himself too. Miss Lewis and Mr. Robinson then stood there and made the guys clean the stuff up like a parent would have to do a child. I had so much on my plate, I did not have time for shit like this. Miss Lewis asked me if I wanted to switch rooms, but I was already too deep in the trap. She wanted me to move into the upperclassmen apartments across campus. Switching rooms might be bad for business, so I told her I would remain in my room. She wanted me to switch rooms because she thought I would eventually physically harm these guys. I was grateful for her concerns, but I was living a second life that she knew nothing of. I did not notice how much things that semester were affecting my mental state. I was becoming more angrier and standoffish. If it wasn't about my trap, grades, or Nikki, I did not care whatsoever. I thought I was focusing, but it was depression. I wasn't popping out with outfits on random days anymore. I only wore a hoodie and sweatpants every day. My hood was on at all times and tied tight to my face. I was basically self-sabotaging to avoid women being attracted to me. I didn't want to look approachable. A lot of days I would forget to eat literally. Nikki would have to remind me a lot of nights that I had to eat something. Some days I would just have juice and a bag of chips. I was almost glued to my desk. I was either trapping or constantly studying. I was already a stoner, but my smoking became nonstop. I was chain smoking at least 12 blunts to myself a day, bare minimum. I had retired from basketball completely. I wouldn't even play for fun now. I had loved basketball all my life, but it now seemed like it would be a waste of time. I didn't even work out anymore. My relationship was getting shittier by the day. My anxiety issues were through the roof. I was going through it mentally. My college experience wasn't so fun anymore. I was a shell of my former self. The charismatic and smooth guy was the complete opposite. I barely could recognize myself in the mirror. Even though I was rejecting the 3D world, my social media popularity never faded. I would make posts about my real life, yet people still found me very amusing. I would vent about my frustrations with the school. I began to notice things that were lacking because I was paying them my money now. I think the humor in it had become that they knew I was not joking, so that's what made it a joke. I wasn't trying to be funny. I naturally was. Everyone was laughing, except me. It was now homecoming week and things looked promising. I got word that my friends from home were coming back. Mark had told me he knew a guy in Memphis that had ounces for the low. I told him to grab a few of them to add to my inventory. I knew the weed from home was more potent, so it was a bonus. Bolton and another former student said they were coming as well. It was now 2.5 months after my birthday incident, and so much had happened since. Bolton's stunts he pulled that day were not in my thought process. I had way bigger fish to fry. He said that they would be staying in the city for a few days this time, instead of going back the same day. I asked where he planned to do this because I had told Mark and Tutu that my floor was open if they needed it. They told me they had booked hotel rooms, but just in case, the spots in my rooms were reserved for them regardless. Bolton told me that they would be staying in Trisha's room. I said that was smooth and I was ready for homecoming to happen. Nikki would be done with her process, and I felt the strain on our relationship would be lifted. I knew how much joining a sorority meant to her, and if it was important to her, it was very important to me to support her. The day before her coming out, Nikki told me they only gave her 2 tickets. I didn't know you had to pay for this event, but it didn't matter because Nikki had 2 tickets. She then told me she had promised the tickets to her boss at work and Shay. Shay was her former roommate that Joe was dealing with. I made a joke about this situation, but there is truth inside of jokes sometimes. I began to express how I was hurt that she wouldn't keep a ticket for me, her boyfriend. This joke was countered with another joke of that I was a dope boy. I could pay for the ticket. I could pay for all the tickets if I wanted. It didn't matter though. I just told her I would buy a ticket at the door. Nikki then left my room because they had a sorority meeting before their big day. After she left, Bolton and Squirrel told me they had arrived on campus. Squirrel was a former student and a native of the city. Squirrel was always in the group chats with us, but he dropped out after freshman year. Therefore, we never really got to hang out with him. The thing I know about Squirrel, though, was that he wasn't the brightest in the bunch. That was fine with me because he was a genuine person. They then came to my room. I was smoking a blunt to myself and they began talking to me. I called up Joe to see what he was on. He told me he was headed to campus soon. He told me he was grabbing the liquor, but I wanted no part in that. Bolton being Bolton wanted to go out on the yard and see people. My trap was booming, and I saw no purpose in leaving. Squirrel went with him though, and I was now alone in my room again. About 5 minutes later, Bolton and Squirrel returned. That was fast, I thought to myself. He then tells me that he saw Joe outside with Kelly. Kelly? What was he doing here? I thought homecomings were for students and alumni, and he got kicked out just last semester. I then understood that Joe had arrived on campus. Joe didn't want to come link with me yet because he was with Kelly, and he knew I didn't fuck with him. Bolton then gets up and goes back outside. He says before he leaves he's about to go get Joe. I told him okay because I was ready to start kicking it for real. When they came back to my door, Squirrel entered first, then Bolton. Bolton went and sat at my desk and then began staring at me and the door back and forth. He looked like he had a face of anticipation. Joe then enters and I smile. I never closed the door once my homies began entering my room. I stood behind it holding it open for them. As I was smiling at Joe, who had now entered the room, Kelly walked in. Kelly walked in with his head down, glued to his phone, and stood in the middle of the floor. I began to stare at him and I didn't move a muscle because I was in shock. The audacity of this nigga. I was trying to process what gave him the bright idea that we were cool again, especially now that I see he had learned his lesson and he was down here to enjoy the college lifestyle again instead of getting his life together. The silence, as usual, was deafening. Kelly did not look up from his phone for 30 seconds. He sensed my energy and vibe and said, I don't have to be here if he doesn't want me in here, and walked out. I didn't even respond. I just closed the door behind him. My face had a look of disgust and then it quickly went away because I had already washed my hands with him. The guys began to sip liquor and I began to smoke my weed. Bolton then asked me to buy half a gram of weed. He wanted to match a blunt with me. By this time in my life, smoking a half a gram of weed was unacceptable. It didn't matter at that moment though because I felt like it was old times at the university. We used to kick it like this as a group. Joe then says that his girlfriend was tripping and he had to go handle her. I knew he was lying. He wanted to go check on Kelly. I didn't fault Joe for this because he had nothing to do with the issues that were between me and Kelly. By the time Joe had left, I had gotten high as fuck. Bolton and Squirrel were sitting there in my room and it was getting later and later. I asked Bolton if they had been to unpack their bags yet. I saw the look on his face and the puppy dog eyes forming. Bolton then asked if he and Squirrel could stay in my room. He told me that Trisha had other guests coming, so her room was now full. I couldn't even be irritated because I somehow knew this was coming. I didn't want anything to ruin my vibe because I needed positive energy this week after the troublesome semester. I then called Mark to confirm that they had hotels. Mark told me yesterday that they had already pre-booked them. Mark then told me that they will arrive in less than an hour. They came in to visit me while Squirrel and Bolton were still in my room. I was very excited when they came and entered my room. It was just like the last time. We immediately started to smoke and joke. Mark had completed the mission of bringing me weed from home, and the quality was even better than expected. I posted that I had some exclusive weed from Memphis and my door began to knock non-stop. Mark and Tutu began making jokes of how I was really doing business for real. They got to see their childhood friend and his dope boy form in full motion. They had heard and talked to me on the phone, but it was different seeing it in person. My clientele list was very long. We started another smoke session, a life lesson that I had heard before was that you shouldn't mix your friend groups. I was about to learn why this was true to an extent. I thought it would be like when Zoe introduced me to Blow. All of us had come from similar environments and had things understood that didn't have to be said. I felt like since Bolton always claimed his hood in Jackson was just like ours in Memphis, it would be the same kind of scenario. Before I could even introduce them, Bolton was already bragging about things that didn't matter. He was speaking with words that made him seem to have a lot of money and materials. Ironically, Mark and Tutu were not impressed. They came to have a good time with me. We began rolling blunts. Mark and Tutu and I had a competition. We were trying to see who could roll the thickest blunt out of the group. This competition was hilarious to us because we all secretly rolled blunts so nobody could take a sneak peek. We judged them at the end like a competition. While we were rolling up, Bolton then asked me to buy another half a gram of weed. When he said this, Mark looked up because he heard him. Mark didn't say anything, but I could read his mind. His mind went from, I know he did not just ask to buy a half a gram of weed. Then I watched it shift to maybe he's doing that to add some more weed to the weed he already had. You see, Mark and Tutu were stoners and kept a nice sack of weed. We would buy ounces and half ounces just to smoke at the crib. When it came time to judge our blunts, it was pure comedy. Mark and I showed our blunts first, and they were neck and neck. I had put 3.5 grams into my blunt, and Mark had done the same. We laughed and joked and said that's how we knew we were best friends. Then Tutu pulled out his blunt, and we started to cry tears. Tutu's blunt looked like it was pregnant. It was already thick on the ends, but in the middle of it was a gigantic bulge from the big bud he had put in it. It looked like Tutu had put 7 grams inside of one blunt. We were hysterical for about 2 minutes and began taking pictures and videos of this blunt. The world had to see exactly what he had done. Squirrel didn't smoke, so he just was laughing with us because the vibe was contagious. Bolton didn't say anything about his blunt, and we didn't expect him because this competition we had done since we were young. It was like our inside thing. That, however, changed once we began to smoke and fire up blunts. I felt that I was the host since everyone was in my room, so I went first. Everything was smooth until Bolton put his blunt in rotation. When Mark got past Bolton's blunt, he literally held it in his hand and stared at it for about 10 seconds. He didn't have a word to say. I glanced at Tutu and we tried to hold in our laughter. This made us laugh even harder once it came out. Mark had a face of pure disappointment. We had come from humble beginnings, but this was taboo to us. Tutu made the situation worse when Mark tried to pass him the blunt. Tutu denied even hitting the blunt and said he was okay. I was about to piss on myself from trying to control my laughter. Bolton always bragged about when it came to money, but now I could see it in his face he felt he couldn't hang with us. These jokes were not to be malicious and really hurt him, because if either one of us would have rolled that, we would have gotten the same treatment. That's how it was growing up with us. If you did something taboo, we were going to let you know about it. That's why we were friends. It was hard for us to offend each other. I saw it in Bolton's face that he was not used to this kind of thing. He always mentioned how Jackson, Mississippi was like Memphis, but he got a first-hand experience of how different we were and we interacted with each other. They told me they were tired from the long drive and were about to head to their hotel. We made plans to see some of the city tomorrow early the next day. The next morning they pulled up to campus. I wanted to go to the mall again. This was fine with me, and Bolton and Squirrel came with us this time. Even though the stress of tuition had been on me all semester, I was finally in position that I wanted to be from the beginning. I could spend cash now just because I had it. I had completed all my payments to the university by this time, and now every dollar I made was mine again. We went to many different stores. Mark and Tutu bought them some clothes for the night, and I did as well. While we did this, Bolton just watched us. It even got to the point I had forgotten he was there because we were so lost in having fun just exploring the mall. We were laughing and joking about how what we had bought. I then thought about Nikki, and so I decided to get her something as well. We returned to campus. Mark and Tutu said they were going back to their hotel to get changed and ready for the night ahead. Bolton, Squirrel, and I then went back to my room. Squirrel tells Bolton that he needed to get something to eat. There was a Popeye's chicken less than half a mile away. It was literally right down the street. Squirrel then asked Bolton to drive. Bolton is very hesitant and reluctant to give up the keys to Squirrel. You know how in some moments you can just tell something is about to happen? Well, this is what happened. He gave in to Squirrel's demands. He then began telling Squirrel not to do anything stupid. Squirrel told Bolton that he was worrying too much. He told Bolton that he wasn't a child and he knew what he was doing. Squirrel then leaves. I had gone to this chicken spot many times, even on foot. It took me less than 15 minutes walking to get there and come back. 30 minutes had passed and Squirrel was still not back. Bolton then called Squirrel on the phone. Squirrel then tells Bolton that he's driving back. Bolton asks why was it taking him so long. Squirrel then says that the Popeyes was 10 minutes away. Why would he ask him this? Bolton looked at me, and then we realized that Squirrel had skipped over the Popeyes 2 minutes away to go to another one. I told you Squirrel wasn't the brightest in the bunch, but this is one of those moments that confirmed it. Bolton then began aggressively talking to Squirrel, telling him to hurry up and come back. They went back and forth for a second before Bolton hung up on him. Another 15 minutes went by, and Squirrel did not return. There was finally a knock at the door, and Squirrel entered. Squirrel had a look on his face that said 1,000 words. I knew he had done something, and that something was not good. He then tells us that he had a mini car accident due to whatever reason. We both jumped up to go look at the car parked in the parking lot. The front bumper was now hanging off. Squirrel had the simplest job in the world, and this is what he did. There was no major damage to the car, but it was just crazy. He actually had a wreck after the conversation prior to him getting the keys. It was like he jinxed him. Squirrel felt very bad about what he did, and Bolton started to pout like he normally did. We went back to my room, and their vibe was very standoffish to each other. Squirrel was trying to say sorry. Bolton was giving him the cold shoulder. Bolton had called his grandmother back home to tell her what happened. During this phone call, I started to gain more insight about Bolton. The manner and tone which he talked on the phone was very childlike. There was a difference between respecting your elders and what he was doing. I then found out that his grandmother had bought the car for him, even though he had been flexing it, saying that he cashed out on it. None of my friends' parents in the hood were able to give us a car. He wasn't even giving a car. They bought one for him. It wasn't a hand me down. Bolton then started crying sadly while talking to his grandmother. She said that they have insurance on his car, so it'll be okay. He hung up the conversation and still had his piss poor attitude. It was starting to get late, and Mark and Tutu had not come back yet. I asked them where they were. They had got caught up in traffic and were arriving a little late than expected. Time was now approaching for Nikki's probate. Bolton and Squirrel said they didn't want to go, but I didn't give a fuck. I was going for Nikki, not to hang with them. I told Mark that Bolton would be in my room if I wasn't there when they got there. While waiting on them, I was going to buy a ticket and attend Nikki's probate. When I got to the door, they said that the tickets were sold out. No, this could not be. I had to be there for her. I had to. I began texting her frantically that they wouldn't let anybody else in. She texted back and brushed it off. She told me it was not a big deal, but I knew Nikki. If I didn't show up to this, it would definitely be a big issue in our relationship eventually. I tried several ways to sneak in, but everything was closed off, and it was only one way in and one way out. I then went back to my room, and Mark told me they had arrived. I met them at the car and filled them in on everything they had missed. They came to my room and we vibed as usual. Squirrel was to himself playing on his phone, and Bolton's energy was the opposite of ours. Nobody cared because we were enjoying ourselves too much. We smoked enough weed to buy enough time for the probate to be over. I knew as soon as it was over, the doors were open and I would be there to congratulate Nikki. Once I got word that I could enter the building finally, I rushed in to find her. I then spotted her and I gave her a humongous hug. The place was still packed and everyone was congratulating whoever they came to support. I then began taking pictures with Nikki and posted them on social media, letting the world know how proud of her I was. I was proud of my girlfriend for accomplishing what she set out to do. I was there for her throughout her entire process and I was glad it was over. She told me that she was about to go to her room to change for the after party. I had bought her over 10 pairs of some exotic panties from a well-known and expensive brand. It was a courtesy to give someone a gift after their probate. I went back to my room and told the guys that we were going to a party tonight. Mark and Tutu were excited. I then grabbed a bag with Nikki's gift and took it to her dorm. Her roommate had also joined a sorority that night and had her family inside of their room when I arrived. It was kind of awkward to give Nikki a bag full of panties while her roommate's dad and mom were standing there. But I really didn't give a fuck. I was so proud of her. Nikki told me that they would need a ride to the party. Liz had also joined the sorority, but it was a different group than Nikki's. This was no problem because Mark and Tutu had the rental car. I went back to my room. When I went back this time, Bolton said that he didn't want to go. This was a complete abnormal of him. He had a sad face. I asked him why, and he said because of what Squirrel did. Even after his grandmother telling him it was going to be okay and taken care of, he was still pouting. As I mentioned, the car had no significant damage, just a fender bender. I knew he wanted some sympathy. I knew one thing for a fact. He was not about to spoil this night. I didn't give a fuck what he was feeling. I hadn't felt this good in forever, it seemed. Squirrel then says he wasn't going either. Squirrel wanted to go, but Bolton's attitude of trying to make him feel like shit was working. That was on them. Me and my day ones were about to do our thing. I then got a text. Nikki said they were ready. When we arrived at the party, the line outside stretched over 100 feet, literally. There were so many people standing outside to get in, and the line didn't seem to budge at all. It wasn't just a straight line either. There had to be at least 100 people in rows of five waiting in this line. We couldn't even see what was going on at the door. That is when Nikki showed off her new status for the first time. She grabbed my hand and we maneuvered our way all the way to the front of the line in less than 30 seconds. She then told them that she was now a member and that the party was going on was celebrating her and her sorority. She never let my hand go during this. Once she said this, security moved out the way with no hesitation. People in the line were confused and angry about how we just got in with no problem. I wasn't confused. In fact, it made me smile seeing her that confident. We entered the party and found a spot where not many people were. We were standing by the bar and I was taking in the surroundings. Many people who I knew since freshman had joined these groups. Even though I had known these people for multiple years at this point, a lot of them looked different and seemed different now that they had joined. I was awoken from this daydream when I was approached by a guy who I was acquainted with. It was the guy who was texting Morg's phone about me that time. Even though he did that, I never held it against him. He was still dressed in the costume that his group wore for the probate. I looked into his eyes and saw that he was very intoxicated. He then reached his arm out, and me and Nikki were looking confused. He then places his hand on top of Nikki's head and palmed it like a basketball. My reflexes made me push him and he stumbled back. I was heated and ready to fight, better yet, beat the shit out of him. Nikki then grabbed me and hugged me as tight as she could, telling me please to calm down and don't ruin her night. I was very angry, but I had to respect her wishes. In the midst of this, Mark and Tutu had finally entered the party. When Nikki and I made our way through the line, they were shy and timid and said they would wait back and stayed. They entered and they were blown away by the college atmosphere of a party. They began to confide and tell me of all the pretty women they were seeing in one place. This started to drift my mind off of what just happened, and I was excited that my brothers from the hood were getting another great experience. Liz then joined us. We all stood together listening to music. A song started playing that we knew, and we began dancing. In the hood, we had never danced. This is what made the night seem fun. It was like we were all able to get out of our comfort zone without fearing of being judged. The ultimate moment was when Liz and Mark began slow dancing together. She was winding her ass on his pelvis. This put a huge smile on me and Nikki's face because our two closest friends from two different worlds came together to share this moment. The rest of the party was a great time and a great night. We left the party about 3 in the morning. The way that Nikki had led me into the party, I was now leading the group out of the party. I was holding hands with Nikki and we began to cross the street to get to the car. A car was coming out and it was coming at us and it did not look like it was going to stop. I was walking and then I stood up tall in front of the whole group with a menacing look on my face, daring the person to drive through us. They acted like they didn't see us, so I made it clear that we were right there. Once the blinding headlights got out of my eye, I noticed who car it was. It was Trish. Her windows were tinted so I couldn't see who was all in the car. The driver made an abrupt stop when they seen the look on my face of I wish a nigga would. Even though the windows were pitch black and tinted and I had bad vision, I could still feel Trisha's energy. This was ironic and an awkward situation because I was holding hands with Nikki and they were now line sisters who used to compete for me. When we got back to campus, I went to sleep in Nikki's room. We both were so exhausted not only from the night, but from the entire semester. It felt like we had been through hell together and we finally got a chance to rest. We didn't even undress to get under the covers. We just laid on the bed and went to sleep. When I woke up, it was around 9 a.m. Nikki was still asleep and she was snoring like she was exhausted. I didn't wake her up. I just eased her off my chest so that I could exit. Mark had called me and told me that he and Tutu were hitting the road in about an hour. We went to go meet in my room, but I was in for a rude awakening when I opened my door. My room was spotless before I left last night. I kept it that way. It was now like a tornado had gone through. Bolton and Squirrel were nowhere to be found. Ethan was up though. I hadn't seen Ethan in a minute because he had gotten a girlfriend and started spending time in her room. My eyes were going from spot to spot, but my brain could not process what I was seeing. There were food bags on the floor with food still in them. There were candy wrappers on my sink. In the middle of the floor in plain view were blunt roaches and ashes. I then looked at Ethan and he knew that I hadn't done this. I then looked at his desk to see they had left tobacco guts from blunts at his desk as well as other junk. My room looked like an abandoned building. This shit was beyond trifling. I took pictures of the room and sent them to Bolton. I instantly apologized to Ethan for this. They were my company, so I took responsibility. Surprisingly, Ethan was cool and told me it wasn't my fault. Ethan then reminded me of everyone wasn't raised the same. I didn't expect to hear that from him. That was proof you can learn things from anyone. We began to clean up the room together. During our cleaning, I got more angry the more filth I found. My brain began putting pieces together that painted Bolton's character completely. He texted back that he wasn't thinking about it because his car was on his mind. That is why he left so early. He then says he's going to send me some money when he got some extra cash. Nigga, do it look like I want your fucking money? It was the principle that he had left my shit bad after I allowed them to stay there. They weren't supposed to stay there in the first place, remember? I didn't care for Squirrel because we barely talked and I knew this was Bolton's doing. I lived with him before, but I forgot he was a dirty ass individual. It was even more disrespectful leaving filth on my roommate's side of the room. The icing on the cake was the blunt roaches. I was literally still on probation from last year. If any residency administration would have walked in my room and seen these blunt roaches, I would be kicked out. This sent my brain to reflect on every moment with him. All the signs were there, but I ignored them because of my loyalty. I also was more free from distractions. When he left me to fight after he got his bong back, he came to me with all those tears because he was scared and needed protection. It even hit me that's why Kelly had the audacity to come to my room. Bolton went out and told him it was smooth to see how I would react. He was the one who witnessed me and Kelly's last conversation. These flashbacks went on and on. My brain showed his puzzle's final form. Bolton was a selfish bitch. He didn't give a fuck about anyone but himself. He was a narcissistic coward. I didn't even respond to his message. I gave him too many chances as it was. Once you crossed T-Mac, it was like a lifetime ban. I knew my value as an authentic person. By the time Mark and Tutu arrived to the room, it was cleaned. I told them I knew a great spot for our last smoke session. I took them to the roof of a building. On this roof, you could see almost the entire city. My mood began to lighten from this beautiful sight. My friends and I had come from the rough hood together, and we were now smoking quality weed from rooftops. This smoke session wasn't the usual laughter and goofiness. It was a silent pleasure. The vibe was still amazing. We took a few pictures and then headed back home. It was a great way to end homecoming.